Welcome to Shamanic Voices, a profound journey into the heart of shamanism led by a seasoned practitioner with over 40 years of experience and his journeymen. Join us as we learn how this ancient wisdom can help you navigate your modern life. I'm Bryan Nolan, your host, a journeyman Tietia, and with me now is your co-host, George Brickman, a shaman, a Tietia. Jorg, how are you doing today?
Quite well, Bryan. Looking forward to hearing about your recent adventures with other modes of healing and communication. I hope our audience will find it as interesting as I did.
I mean, I found it quite interesting myself. I did not expect it to happen at all. It's always interesting when we encounter these different modes of healing that we were not expecting to walk into often.
For sure. And sometimes the healing is not necessarily physical healing like we think of. It's giving a sense of closure at a point in someone's life.
Yeah.
It's more being a facilitator. I think that's the process that you did to a large extent.
Yep, the process I started and looking forward to continuing for this family. I was asked to go to this hospice patient for medical massage at first, but of course offering Teutonic healing. And they had originally had a lower back issue in the spine and went to there to relieve some of the pain. This is not someone that's going to recover. They're in their last final days, last few months. So it's helping the family just get their father a little bit out of pain through this process. And got a call from the client's family saying they had a massive degradation between the time I saw them then and then now. Let me know they had lost about 35 pounds. Were slipping in and out of the just comatose state, falling asleep, not very responsive, not really even speaking too much. So they asked me to just come see what I could do, just to help.
So this was like final stage Alzheimer's, is that correct?
The interesting thing is it wasn't really before. He wasn't really forgetting where he was. He just suddenly, out of nowhere, about 2 months ago, started having a cognitive decline. His body started shutting down. He used to be bilingual, stopped being bilingual, and he was very with it up until that point. He knew where he was, and then suddenly it was a rapid degradation.
Okay.
So not normally how it presents, but he was trapped in the sense in his own head. But he had made his peace with everything. In the sense of with family. According to the family, he was not scared to go in any way. So when I got there, he was asleep on the couch, just sitting there, not really able to move too well. And his wife, motioned that he couldn't get in bed. I said, that's okay. Don't worry about it. I don't think I'm doing massage today on him. So I sat and I asked his body, what can I do to help? Can't fix this. What can I do to help? And I saw this level of fear within him. Of course, first common sense that point is it's probably the fear of dying.
Of course.
That a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
It makes sense. Even if you have a worldview that supports a happy transition, until you experience it, it's going to be scary for anyone.
Sure.
So I sat down and started speaking to his body. I'm trying to go beyond the body and speak to his consciousness, the consciousness that had retreated in itself or above itself in a sense, and spoke to the higher consciousness, the Loile, the Luanto, and the emotional body to ask, what is holding you on here? Why is it that you haven't transitioned yet, that you are still staying here despite the pain in your body wanting to go? And he started telling me that he was scared. He was scared what would happen when he went. And I asked him, what do you think happens when you go? He said, I don't know. I think there's heaven and hell. I don't know what happens when I go.
I think you mentioned that he was feeling some regrets about being very driven in his career, not spending enough quality time with the kids. I guess normal sorts of things a lot of successful people would have.
Yeah, well, we got to that a lot later. That was after we started talking about the worldview. So first, he wasn't really sure what was going to happen. I told him, well, I can't tell you what happens. I can tell you what we believe happens and what I see happen with clients. Would you like to hear it? And while we're going through this, he is leaning back on the couch, comatose, of course, and I'm holding his hand, talking to him psychically, as we do.
Right. So that,
And
let's emphasize that to our listeners that you're not having an open conversation with this guy. He would not be capable of it. The deterioration, the mental deterioration in place as it was. This is all I guess what you'd say telekinesis, psychic discussion.
Psychic, telekinetic. So this is just a crazy person talking to him back and forth. But it's always interesting when you see the responses in the body, where as you're talking, the body calms down. So you have the confirmation. But when I started asking about what he thinks, and started telling him a little bit about how we look at it, how when you pass, you both go before the Thingstead of the God and the Fates. Your ancestors give you the ability to speak, as you've lost the ability to speak through the shock of the transition. And as I start saying this, he kind of rises up off the couch and is very disoriented and not frustrated, just as you see with late cognitive decline, the disorientation. And then when he relaxed again, I asked him, do you want to continue? And he said, yes, I do. You could tell it was almost like this battle between his higher consciousness and his body, just when hearing these certain things that differed from what he thought the programming he would have, it caused a distraction. So as I was going through this process, I started also seeing that there was a little bit of a spiritual influence in trying to keep him trapped here as well. That there was a reptilian that was, in addition to this, trying to feed on all the pain. That was very quick to remove and not too big of a deal. And once that was removed, we got to continue the conversation. And upon this process, I continued on the story of what happens, how we look at it, how you go through your life, and what happened in it. Even if there are things that you did wrong, where you might see them as sin or anything like that, that's not how the gods and goddesses look at it, how the council looks at it. They go through the pieces and the threads of your life, your narrative, to help you understand what happened, your accountability, what was not, so you can depotentiate it and find that conflict resolution at the end of your life.
In fact, and I'm not trying to interrupt you, you're doing great, Bryan, but when we're through with this, you had another experience today with a recently deceased 41-year-old.
I did.
Seeing the whole process of going before the council, so we can bring that in to tie these two themes together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So as I explained to him about the going through it, not being blamed for inaction or actions that were negative, just understanding what components did you do that could have been better. Not wrong, better, so that you don't have to carry these to the next life. And a few more times through this process, he would come back to, you could feel the disorientation from this going against all the programming that he would have through his life. But at the same time, you could feel calmness coming over him piece by piece through this. Almost like a deep understanding, reconnecting to the higher consciousness, kind of separating the lower life from that process so the emotions are not overwhelming the higher consciousness. And finally, we went to the point of reincarnation. Talked about it just a little bit, how you don't necessarily, come back here to relive a human life. You kind of go through, what do you want to do? They may make suggestions to you upon what would be the best for the evolution of your soul. It's not them demanding that you do anything.
Or forcing you to do anything, yes.
Yes. They make suggestions. Doesn't mean you have to follow them. But they'll at least push it so you're not doing anything bad to yourself or other people. So
sure. Yes.
Just like a really good parent in that sense. So this gave his whole body and his consciousness a sense of comfort and calm. And then we started talking about, what do you need here still? What is it that you're still holding on to here? Do you still feel scared? He said, no, I don't. This makes me feel better. I said, okay. I can't tell you this for sure, but I can tell you this is how we look at it, and I believe this truly. And he said that he wanted to still see his kids one more time. I said, have you made peace with your daughter? Yes. With your son? Yes. And then he said, but what I haven't done is I want to say to my wife that I'm sorry for not being around more. Now, as this is going on, the wife is sitting there, cross, eating food, and I'm sitting there holding his hand, just tears running down my face because the joy of being an empath. And he's telling me how he worked so hard to make this family as immigrants thrive. He dedicated himself to everything like that, and he wishes he was around for his wife.
And didn't you say that it was important to him to tell her he loved her, or to say something else in English to her?
Yes.
And that he really
cool.
regretted losing his English as his mind deteriorated. Yeah.
Yeah. He wanted to say, I love you in English one more time to her. I said, I think we can try that. Let's try. So, at this point, I felt the goddess Velma come through, and she offered to help with this.
Velma, of course, is our goddess of the inland waters. She's the thought of as the consort of Ati, the god of the oceans. So she has come through to us in recent years, and I was quite surprised this myself. It happened very spontaneously one time when I had what I thought was a just ridiculously challenging healing, where I thought, well, maybe I'll be able to get some progress with this person. In about an hour and a half before the client was driven down here by her daughter from South Carolina, she spoke up and said, call on me in front of her. And if she is not offended and she doesn't mind, and she's willing for me to work on her, you will see amazing results. Okay, I'm not going to argue with the goddess.
Yeah,
so I did, and it was quite amazing.
Yeah, I've been getting to know her more and more. She's come through quite a bit for a lot of clients, and absolutely astounding results. I had an encounter with her not long ago where I just asked her, because she's not the goddess of healing, as Freya is or Mayaliki is, but she's, of course, done miraculous healings. And I asked her, so what else are you the goddess of? She starts showing me imagery of the water and things growing in the bottom, the lake, the sea. She said to me, I'm also the goddess of life. And she may not mean this quite literally of life itself, but when you think about things growing, water nourishes, it made a lot of sense. And during this client's session is when it made even more sense. So when Velmo came through, she offered to help with this. Upon him asking, I want to see my kids again, and I want to, be cognizant when I see them. Not like this. I want to say goodbye to them. And she told me to ask him if he was willing to have her assist. And I asked him, the goddess of Elnamo is offering to help with this. Would you like to meet her? And I felt him and saw him just get very not uncomfortable, confused, disoriented, and a little scared at the same time. I said, it's no pressure on this. You don't have to. Just she's offering to assist with this.
Now, if you had said she's offering to act very much like Kuan Yin, you might have been a little more receptive.
It's possible.
Yeah.
And so he said, okay. And then I said, well, why don't you turn around? Look behind you. He turns around, and I just watch his jaw drop open as he sees Velamo standing there. And it said, she is offering you her waters so we can nourish your body and revitalize it enough so that you can do what you need to do here. Is that okay with you? And he said, yes.
So you were offering him closure, and that's a large part of what we are able to do as well.
Yeah.
It's not an everyday task, but it is necessary sometimes.
Yeah.
When
a
condition
always work, but
can't be changed,
Yeah. So she showed me to pull these through his feet, through the body, and I could feel in the physical body the muscles, the atrophied muscles, the hypertonic muscles start relaxing little by little by little as this is being pulled up through the whole body. And at this point, then Himdolker, the god of holy fire, and if you want to elaborate a little more on who Himdolker is, I think that'd be great for the listeners.
Well, we have found it possible in our particular consideration of the theologies that there's really no big contradiction between the Norse and the Finnish theology. The stories are often similar. Many of the gods and goddesses have similar functions. Heimdallr, which is often called Heimdall in English, but the actual Old Norse pronunciation or Icelandic pronunciation would be Heimdallr, is the god who defends the Rainbow Bridge at the final battles of Ragnarok, the ending of the age, basically, is what it should be properly translated as. And he is the god of the healthy fire, the useful fire, the earth fire, for example, and the fire of illumination, the fire which penetrates mysteries, which brings light to the dark space. Whereas Baldur is the god of the fire of the sun, which brings in the light that brings life. And conversely, of course, Loki is the god of mischief, who brings in, the wildfire, of course. Who else would be associated with wildfire? So 3 different understandings of fire. And Suna is the vegetative intelligence of the sun. Baldur is the inner light of the sun, the sun as it affects humanity spiritually, as it does, for instance, for astrologers and those who meditate upon the sun. The idea of a sun sign and all of that. So there you have 4 different deities associated with light.
Well, when I had originally started reaching out to Himdolker to ask him, just as I did with the Velmo, I knew of him as the god of useful fire, holy fire, and I asked him what else he the god of, and he showed me light within the body. And he said, I'm also the god of light within the body, revitalizing it. And to say the illuminating light, he came through in this and showed me to do the same, pull this baby blue fire up through the body, revitalizing it. And I saw it's temporary. This is not permanent. This is simply temporary for closure and working in conjunction harmoniously with it. And I posited the question as this was going on, water extinguishes fire. So just curious, how is this working? And he showed me the heat building up in the body, revitalizing the cells, working in conjunction with the blood flow returning to it. And at this point, I could feel the body relax more. The tension in the legs and the hips, the hands, the arms, the elbows, just relaxing. And then when we finished, he sat up and started speaking much more normally. Not in English, but in his native language.
Sure.
To his wife. And he was immediately more coherent.
I'm sure she noticed the difference, no doubt. When we think of the life force spark, which Sisu today kind of means a stubborn, resistant attitude, a doggedness. It used to also refer to one of the flames back in pagan times when pagans were the norm. So we think of it as the electric blue flame. It's not too different from what you've got behind you on your wall. Kind of that clear blue flame that you see in a propane torch, something like that, or the neon blue,
Right.
And that's what we kind of see coming up from the earth when we draw in power to ourselves from the earth.
The Sisu.
Yes.
Well, and
and of course it manifests then as that attitude, that's connected with it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my wife is an occupational therapist, and she works and sees people transitioning quite often. And you always hear about those last couple of days when someone is really down, and then suddenly comes back for the last hurrah, do the last things, and then 24 hours later, gone.
Right.
And to be,
I think it's called an end of life rally.
Yeah, precisely. or in the facility that she used to work in. It was every time someone saw this little girl appear in their room, they'd have that last day, 24 hours, and be gone. So
Well, interesting.
there's a little guy that was sitting in that room, or in that facility. So it's very interesting, very benevolent.
Yeah.
Nothing's more comforting though than seeing a little girl towards the end of life guiding you.
Yeah, nothing foreboding about a little girl like the Morton Salt girl that used to be on all the salt cylinders for years and years. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was a pretty amazing and unexpected experience to go there. And I was looking just to, in a perfect world, my goal when I went there was to help the body feel some balance and some less pain in its last days. Maybe find out why I was holding on a little bit.
Yeah.
Did I expect this to this level? No, I did not. But I left there so energized and happy. I mean, I called you right afterwards to tell you about it. But it was just one of those experiences where when you see it, you go, oh, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. I'm very happy to be able to help with this.
Well, that's where you always have to have that attitude of adaptability. We're not there to force this matrix onto somebody, this grid work of how we think the session should go. We have to listen and see how they want it to go, what they need, what their needs are. And sometimes the needs are very different than what you were told on intake.
Yeah,
as you discovered, you know.
Well, the other case you mentioned, unless you have any more questions about this one.
No, go right ahead.
So the other one with the 41-year-old that had passed today, they were getting kind of stuck around, lingering on guilt and holding it on. And when I realized that's what was going on during the session, I looked and I said, okay, what can we do to resolve this? And so I went to talk to her. She's been on the other side for not that long.
Yeah, 4 months, right?
Yeah. And when I went to go speak to her, talked to her about it, and she let me know that she didn't know how to let go of the guilt of what she had done. Even though she understood rationally that it was not being held against her, she did not know what to do with it. Because, of course, it's not just that. It's everything intertwined with what led to it. The addiction, the death, everything else, the impact on everyone. It's not just the one instance, but everything altogether.
Well, it goes to show that even when others had forgiven and tried to resolve in their own minds what she'd done to harm their quality of life or threaten their lives itself through her careless or negligent or addictive, for lack of a better word, behavior.
Yeah.
It's very hard for the individual to stop blaming themselves, even if others quit blaming them. You know.
I mean, even with all the work I've done, I still sit there sometimes and bring up an event from the past and blame myself for something I did as an addict, and I have to sit there and logical it out and go through the conflict resolution and depotentiate it. And it's a royal pain every time. It feels good afterwards. But it's a lot of work to do that.
Yeah.
So when I started breaking this down for her a little bit, I explained to her about the transition, and she was already aware of, in her upbringing, of what happens in this worldview. She was pagan, and still scared. So when I facilitated and invited her grandfather in to assist and guide her to Thingstead, her ancestor, so she could go through this process, through the transition process, while I was still working with my client, she agreed to go to this. She said, no, I want to do this. I want to let go of this, especially if this guilt is still affecting the person.
Now, we just use a couple of words here, the council. So that's what we call the Thingstead of the gods and goddesses and fates. And I guess people tend to think or interpose or juxtapose the Christian concept of this Christian and Muslim concept of a judgment going on. And certainly toward the end of the popular pagan era, I think there was a lot of juxtaposition trying to see the transition as we understand it as some sort of judgment process. But in reality, it is a reassignment. It's, well, as you discovered today, a counseling experience, and a negotiating experience. But please go on.
Yeah, and I've helped guide people there before, transition them, but I've never talked to them afterwards. It was very interesting. So as I was working with the client, set them up to go up. I saw them stand before Thingstead, and I let it be. They're with their grandfather. They're with their ancestors. They don't really need me there. I've done my part here. So about 3 or 4 minutes later, they show back up. And I go, welcome back. How long were you over there? And they said, it's been hours. For us, it's been 4 or 5 minutes. And I said, so what was it like? And they explained to me that it wasn't what I thought. It wasn't bad. It wasn't scary. All the different things that they brought up, the different events that I had experienced, they showed me what was involved with it, what was my accountability, what was spiritual influence, what was other people's influence, so I could understand the pieces that I needed to make peace with to resolve the conflict. And man, it was so much easier to do it there than it was here when I was alive. And I joked around with her and said, well, you probably should have done it while you were here. You'd still be here. But she chuckled a little bit. But she told me that she had to go back a couple more times, that there was a lot to do. And that's something new that we learned today.
Yes, it is, indeed. The thought always was, or what's recorded in the literature is always, it's just one event, one trip before them, and to know that from somebody who came back from one experience with it, that it was going to be broken down into 2 or 3 visits. We have indeed learned something.
Yeah. And you imagine, when you think about it logically, we have a client that comes to us who's dealing with, not to minimize any addiction, but let's just say a marijuana addiction. And, that's genuinely, most of the time, much easier than a heroin addiction. There's a lot less stuff attached to it, a lot less poor choices attached to it. You can get a lot more traction in one session, a lot more done in one session often. Not everyone, but
yeah.
Why would it not make the same sense for a counsel, for you have to go in pieces so you can resolve what you can, and at a certain point, okay, you return when you're ready for the next. These have to make sense, fully make sense. You have to process these. Because of course, when we think of the fact that was, 5 minutes to us, hours up there, the more things have happened in your life, the more things you have to go through. Because you can't carry
Agreed.
on.
Well, lives have different levels of complexity. If you've led a life that's free of deceit and is relatively simple, based upon trying to maintain a benevolent relationship with many others, there's probably not nearly as much to go through. It's unresolved issues are what's getting resolved then, so the person can go and evolve. The soul can go and evolve into a higher form, higher state of being.
Well, I told you about another case I encountered where a draugr, a hungry ghost, had attached to a woman when she was about 8 or 9 years old. And it was not malicious. It was not trying to hurt anything. It was just wandering. It was trapped here. It was a suicide. I'm not going to get into the whole dark story of this, but when I encountered it, I gave it a choice. It can either be forcibly removed, which we know how to do, or it can tell me its story so that it can leave amicably, because that will be the best for its evolution. So it can try to make some peace and conflict here, so when it goes before the council, the Thingstead, the gods and the fates, that it understands that we're not here to punish. It's not judgment. We're going to explore what happened. And I think a lot of people don't understand that, whether it's the afterlife or just in the sense of counseling. I mean, how many times do you run to with a client? And we mentioned we were going to talk about some of the psychotherapy that we do, but how we look at it is what I mean. The concept of me versus you, I win, you lose. So many people think that when they go to any sort of counseling session or anything, that they're going to get blamed. Oh, look what you did wrong here and here, versus explore how not to repeat mistakes. Yeah. Especially in couples counseling. It's a whole fun thing always.
Yeah. Assigning blame is not always helpful. Accepting your own accountability on your own is the ideal thing. But above all, just the coaching, the learning in our form of uncounseling, our form of untherapy that we do.
Yeah.
That's our pastoral intervention, or pastoral communication with somebody who's experiencing a mental or emotional difficulty or challenge. Can be very helpful to do that.
Ministerial life counseling. Yeah.
It's just to allow them to accumulate wisdom and to discover resources in themselves, and to evaluate alternative perspectives on what they've encountered. Because quite often with the perspectives, if you help them change that, it becomes not nearly as challenging as it was before.
Yeah.
And they often come up with solutions when you can do that.
And I see so many times when I speak to clients who've been, with a therapist for 2-3 years, where they're being taught to hyper fixate and analyze every single section of their problems and almost relive their issues over and over and over. Where we look at it where you go, no, this happened. How do we make this not repeat? How do we
move on
this behind?
And move on, yeah. Because basic law of dynamics that we understand of psychodynamics is that if you focus on something, you're going to tend to get more of it. So if you focus on your issue, let's say you have a tendency to overeat, I'm just obsessed over my overeating, guess what I'm going to tend to do more of,
Yep.
I'm going to tend to do more overeating. I may feel guilty about it later. I may feel bad about it. I may feel stuffed and uncomfortable, but nonetheless, I'm going to tend to repeat more of it. On the other hand, if I focus on something completely different, move my mind off it, look at it as something resolved, I'm much less likely to go to that behavior.
Yeah. And when we have a conflict going on, I just dealt with this earlier today, a conflict that frankly does not have a real resolution yet, in the sense of the progress it's going to now. It's going to be months before they can figure out what happens. If you look at the possible outcomes, make peace with a couple of the outcomes. You go, okay, when I feel myself spiraling, you acknowledge, I've done the things that I can here. There's nothing else I can do. I don't have control out of this anymore. Make peace with that. Do something else and focus on that. Because otherwise, that's all you're going to think about. And you will self-sabotage. That's guaranteed.
Yeah.
The more you think about it, you will find, if you catastrophize and think about the worst possible outcome, you will bring that to fruition. That's almost guaranteed.
Well, this is one of the useful aspects of anxiety. Is anxiety keeps us focused on apparently a kind of a diaphanous threat. We can't see the threat clearly, or it would be fear. Anxiety means that we don't really define it that well, but we're anxious about what's going to happen. We're anxious about the possible outcomes. And from that can spur your creativity, can spur your resourcefulness to find a solution. As long as it's not obsessive, it can actually serve a useful purpose. So we don't look at anxiety per se as an issue, as long as it doesn't affect your functionality.
Yeah.
If it were to affect your ability to cleanly make decisions and figure a way out of something, that would be a problem. If it's paralyzing, that would be a problem. That would require intervention.
Is wrapping around them like a web, where it basically ties every single irrational event together to one point. Okay, let's unravel these threads. Let's make this logical anxiety versus illogical anxiety.
Right.
Because as we discussed with the body plays out it's the fear of the subconscious. So,
and of course, this is part of our pagan view of what are considered mental or emotional disturbances. Depression is not necessarily a bad thing in itself. If it becomes paralyzing and you're having phantom aches and pains, and you can't get up in the morning, and you hit a wall in the afternoon, you can't seem to stay awake, or you get disorganized thinking because there's so much turmoil underneath, that's a problem. That's a functional issue.
Yeah.
So what we can do is try to deconflict that, try to explore it, and help resolve it that way. But the process of depression itself is just part of the friction of life. everything's not always going to be cheerful. Everything's not always going to be worry-free. As long as the worry is not obsessive or dysfunctional, as long as the depression is not causing interference with function, then our basic knowledge is you go through it and you learn from it.
Yep.
And you find a higher way of thinking where you don't encounter those same circumstances again.
You mean Prozac's not the answer?
Exactly. Right. And above all,
so many people are taught that feeling depression means there's something wrong with you, especially males. But you're taught that by feeling depression that you are wrong or you're weak or you need to get rid of it, versus using it as a tool to grow. Because you feel it now, you go through it. Let's say you've never felt depression in your life, and then you go through a divorce when you're 50.
Yeah.
Really wish you had some practice with depression, don't you?
Yeah. Well, we can look at it that sometimes it's a justified thing, but it helps you, again, put closure on one thing when you realize I've closed out all my options. You thought and thought and thought and rethought it, whatever, and you just finally go, I or we had to walk away from this. This wasn't going to work no matter what I or we did. Then you can put it into perspective. And again, this is where perspective is one of the great gifts in resolving these things. And of course, substitution therapy helps a lot, where you're substituting some other activity or thought or process instead of the depression or anxiety. Yeah. It's like creating a white noise to drown out the noise of a rabbit being killed or something like that, a hideous noise,
Well, like, for instance, someone who's in a conflict that's unresolvable until a certain point, and they get involved in a outdoor kayaking group or yoga, something to empower them in the sense of promote healthy lifestyle, focus on something outside the self and substitute for it, and have something to look forward to.
Well, focus is the important thing that you just hit on there, which is you're putting your energy and your attention on something other than the issue. And this is part of course, what we always seek to create in somebody is to help them find is to be solution-oriented rather than problem-oriented.
Yeah. Well, I had go ahead.
And to the extent that rumination or temporary depressive state or temporary anxiety state helps you to become solution-oriented, and sometimes it just means exhausting all the repetitive thoughts you've had and going, okay, I give up. There's no way out of that, at which point you can help them lead forward. Go ahead.
I had circling back to depression for a second, I had a client who was, I think he was from Cuba or somewhere in that or Latin America, but very, very heavy Spanish dialect, very little English. And what I managed to understand from him was he didn't know why he was feeling all these things. His back was hurting, all this stuff. He's getting headaches. He's like, something's wrong with me, and I don't know why. And I started exploring, okay, well, what's going on in your life? And I find out he had left the mother of his child for a woman he met impulsively and was cheating in a sense, but kind of left just up and left. I don't know if there's an affair, but up and left. And was very happy, this and this and this. And then 3 months later, that woman who he left for just up and left him, just like that. And he had never experienced this before. He had done this to multiple people, had never experienced. I said, you're feeling depression. And he goes, what? And we explored it a little bit. The hardest part here was not the psychology. The hardest part was the language barrier. And explained to him and go, did the mother of your child, did she get very upset when you left? And this, she couldn't function. I go, do you see the correlation here? She goes, is this how she felt? I go, yes. And he goes, I need to make this right. I go, yes, you do. This will help you resolve this conflict of depression. This is very straightforward. But so this is an example of someone who had never actually experienced this emotion before and was, I think, 56 years old.
So he was finally learning some empathy for what women go through when men go to the next shiny object, right?
Right, right, exactly. And I'm very happy to facilitate that. I almost chuckled afterwards, going, "That was the easiest case I've ever worked, ever." It took 10 minutes, and I was done. I didn't even charge him. It was a phone call, and he left. That was it. It was just we did it all in the intake. I was so happy to complete that one.
Oh,
But
that's terrific. Yeah,
it
yeah.
just it's and I don't mean to make fun of something that simple. It was just literally did not understand what depression was, because also in Latino culture, men do not get depressed. There's no such thing.
Well,
Machismo.
look at see. So what you're describing to me is where the depression led him to this resolution. It actually taught him by showing him the dark side of what the other party experiences when you're irresponsible, or when you make a commitment lightly and don't really mean it, or you're always holding out the thought that you want the bigger, better thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which, of course, could happen to either gender. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. It's never exclusive to one.
Right. Well, I'm glad we had a chance today to explore some of the different modalities that we end up doing as TTA or as Teutonic healers. It's more than just I hurt my shoulder, or I've got indigestion when I eat. It can be much more involved than that, and that's how we find solutions. Can be much more involved as a result. Next time, we were thinking tentatively, you and I talking about it. We can mention this for next episode. Maybe going over some of the terms we mentioned, like this parts of the soul. What is the Loanto? What is the Itse? What is the Loili? What is the Henki? What are the parts of the body that we deal with as healers? What are some of the metaphysical correlations, let's say, between Norse and Finnish culture? Some of the same figures that we see in our cosmology, and maybe even how they tie into other cultures. For instance, the Titans and the Jotuns would be a classic example that ties in, from, in that case, Norse and Greek culture. Just might be something people would find interesting. What is our worldview from which we're working as we do our work as priests/healers? What is that priestcraft all about? So we could explain.
I think that's a fantastic topic. Absolutely.
All right. Well, we'll get that spreadsheet out and go over it and see what we can come up for next time.
That sounds like a plan. Well, Georg, thank you again for being with me today.
Well, thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing your very intense encounters, Bryan. I think it'll give a little different view to people of what it is, the variety of tasks that we fulfill.
Yeah. I agree.
Well, sir, go with the gods.
Go with the gods.